Hey guys, it's Dr. May here. Thanks for joining me. This is the first of 3 videos in a new sort of mini series that I'm doing about understanding and working with target behaviors. Okay, so this one is about behavior chain analysis, which is a technique that's often used in DBT. And then the next 2 are going to be other techniques that are also very helpful from Lisa Ferenz, who's a popular licensed clinical social worker that works with trauma and self-injury quite a bit. So I'm going to kind of go over those techniques in the next 2 videos. So let me pull up this for us here. All right. So you might have noticed, some of you, that I already have a video on behavior chain analysis on my YouTube channel, which I did a couple of years ago. But this is a new and upgraded version that I wanted to share with you that kind of really breaks it down and goes through a very thorough example. So I think you'll get a lot out of it, even if you've already seen the first one. And this is a technique that you could use on yourself if you're a do-it-yourselfer, or if you're a therapist, you could use this technique with a client. And I feel like today, after you watch this, you'll feel like you'll have enough tools to kind of give it a try, even today. So it's really broken down very clearly. So I hope that'll help you. All right, so these are the 3 videos that'll be in this little mini series. And today we're going to do the behavior chains, as we can see here. So you can look for those 2 upcoming videos soon, probably within the next couple of weeks. All right, so I threw around the term target behaviors, and it's used a little differently depending on where you're hearing it from. So sometimes they say the target behavior is the behavior you want, like the behavior you're trying to do. But in DBT, they talk about target behaviors as being the behavior you're trying to change. So I just want to clarify that point. So, for example, you might be trying to change self-injury or aggression or an eating disorder behavior or a substance abuse or addictive behavior of some kind. So that's the behavior we're referring to today when we use the term target behaviors. Okay. So there's always a good intent behind them. They don't come out of nowhere, and they're not for no reason. And if we're the clinician, we might see them as the big problem, but the client might see it as the solution. It might be the way that they've developed to regulate their emotions or to communicate or to decrease or increase their arousal and, feel more comfortable in their skin. And so it's important to go through and understand what it's about for each person and what are the things that lead up to it, so that if it's something we want to change, we can know where the different places are where we could intervene and maybe try something different. So the behavior chain analysis is a great tool for that. So here's just like a little illustration. So the target behavior might feel like it's coming out of nowhere, or you might have a vague idea that, yeah, I was really upset, or this was going on and I got really upset and this happened. Or sometimes it feels even more vague, like, I don't know, I thought I was doing pretty well, and then before I knew it, I was hurting myself. So it's important to go back step by step and take your time and really look through the different links of the chain, all the little mini things that kind of lead up to it, and then look at what followed it. So there's often maybe some kind of initial relief or some positive feelings afterwards, and then the negative consequences sneak back in. So understanding that whole process and going through it and seeing where along the way we could intervene is very important. And so here's another diagram that kind of shows some of the benefits. So when you do the behavior chain, and then you go back and you see where you could do things differently, eventually, when you're in your regular life, you could start to be mindful and recognize, you know what? I'm at an earlier part of this chain. I see where things could be going. I have a sense I'm in that chain again. And I'm going to stop now and see if I could create a different outcome. Let me try one of those things I problem solved about and see if it makes things different or better. And so that can lead me down to healthier choices. And sometimes we're lucky enough to intervene very early in the chain, and it's a little easier, maybe further back, but it's still not even too late to intervene right before the target behavior. And a quote I really like, which I used in one of my DBT groups, because we always start with a quote, is no matter how far you've gone down the wrong road, forward, you could always turn back. So even if you got all the way to the step before, on the verge of doing it, it's never too late to stop and try something else. But again, with great awareness and mindfulness, you could start even further back to do something differently, and it could lead to a very different outcome. And a lot of times when you realize you're able to do that, it gives you a positive sense of control and a positive sense of efficacy. Like, I do have a choice. I can make this different. It's not just inevitable. Okay, so in DBT treatment, just putting it out there, it's important to have clients do a diary card, which is like a self-monitoring sheet to kind of keep track of how you're doing day to day. And it also helps you understand what happened on the days where target behavior did occur. So when you look back on the week, you could kind of see, all right, what are my urges? Let me go blow it up here. What actions did I do? What emotions were I having? What were some significant events or triggers that happened that day? And what coping skills might I have tried, if I tried any? And looking at the connections between all those things is also very informative in terms of understanding the target behavior. And if you're in therapy, it may be hard to know where to start. So looking at the week, there might have been several ups and downs, might give you a sense of which day or which behaviors are the most important, and we could start there. And it gives you kind of a structure and a direction, especially if things feel like they're, really overwhelming or very chaotic or all over the place, and it's hard to even know where to begin. So very important tool. I have a whole video on this, so please feel free to review that. I don't want to go too far into it today, though. Okay, so even if there isn't a diary card, you still could do a behavior chain on any kind of behavior, so long as you're aware of it. So you could do it on yourself, or if you're a therapist, if you're made aware of a behavior that happened with your client, you could always do it whether or not there's a diary card. Although if there's regular behaviors, doing a diary card is definitely an important tool to use. Okay, so here's a little chart that I use myself, and you can recreate this very easily. I like to type it out because it's easier to kind of go back and insert things if you've left out details. But you could also journal this. You could just make two or three columns in a journal, or you could, type it out in your own way. So here is the different components. So one is you define what the target behavior is that we're working on. So let's just be clear that we're working on this particular thing that happened this day. Then we look at the different chain of events. So kind of like I had in the illustrated chain, you start with the vulnerability factors. So what can we mean by this? So these are the things that make you more vulnerable to stress and triggers when they do occur. It kind of is this undercurrent of a vulnerability or stress that makes you more reactive if something were to happen. So for example, like if you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, or hydrating or exercising enough, like the please skill in DBT. If you're physically ill, or you have chronic pain, or if you have sensory overload or underload, like if there's too much noise and chaos around you, that could be triggering and make you more vulnerable. Or if it's too quiet and too boring and too low stimulation, that could be a problem. If you're experiencing any side effects or effects from medications or substances, whether they're over the counter or illegal or illegal or prescribed, you still could have certain physical effects from it that can make you more vulnerable. And even having other underlying stressors in your life kind of put you at a more vulnerable state. So if something were to happen, it sort of pushes you over the edge, like the straw that broke the camel's back. Okay, so identifying some of those first is important. And that might involve going back to the day before or earlier in the day, or even just giving yourself an overall context of what's been going on lately. And all that can be part of the vulnerability factors. So then I would start with the step-by-step chain that kind of led up to the behavior. And again, that might start early, go to the very beginning of that day when you first woke up, or maybe the night before, depending on what the situation was. And, go slice by slice, chain by chain, link by link, so to speak, and see if you could put it together. And as you go, so you're going to list what happened, and then see if you could identify where was your urge at each section. So earlier on the chain, it could be that your urge was low, and then as things start to happen and escalate, maybe your urge went up, or maybe there's times when it went lower again and then higher again, and kind of get a sense of what were the things that made it worse and what were the things that made it better. So in each row, do your best to try to identify the urge. Okay. And then after you do that, you're going to go back and see where along the way could you have tried something differently. And you might be able to think of something for every little row, for every little piece, but sometimes maybe for some of them, maybe not for everything. So do the best you can. And you could always come back to this. The idea is that although you could do this verbally, and there's many times why I have done it verbally with the client and didn't write it down, but there's a lot of advantages to writing it because it kind of frees up your mind to not have to remember every detail and keep it all in your head. So this way you can just relax and look at it and kind of look at the different components in whatever order you need to look at it, and then slowly identify the skillful alternatives. It also gives you a certain distance from it and a certain perspective by seeing it written down instead of just keeping it in your head where it's already floating with some other things and emotions. Another thing too is that, let's go to the next one. In the example, like there's an initial, I'm sorry, I'll get to that in a sec. The initial story that comes out might be all over the place. You might be very overwhelmed. It might be kind of chaotic. It might be out of order and hard to get a grip on it. So writing it down and making sure you put it in order organizes it in your mind so it's easier to work with. Other times it may not be a whole lot of detail at all, but if you kind of break it down and make it in small slices, then you can work with it rather than just, I don't know, it just kind of happened. Okay, so now, sorry about that. We're going to go through a detailed example of how to do it. All right. So I just want to give a trigger warning. So this is going to discuss cutting, and there's no pictures, but I am going to discuss the situation that led up to an incident of cutting. So if this is triggering for you, please use your best judgment about whether you're up for watching this part of the video. Okay. The last thing I'd want to do is be your trigger today. So make sure you're in a good place and you're up for working through this today. And if you're not, that's okay. Or you could always come back. Okay, so here we go. And this is not, it's kind of like a composite example. It's not like somebody's specific story. So it's no breaking of confidentiality here. All right, so in this example, I'm going to start with maybe an initial story that came out about the incident. So if you're the therapist, you're going to ask your client, you're going to see it on the diary card maybe and say, well, what happened? So let's say the initial story is something like this. Well, lately, I've been feeling kind of stressed about the holidays and being single again. I got an impulsive thought to look up my ex-boyfriend on Facebook, and I saw him in a picture with another woman who I assume is his new girlfriend. I got really upset and started spinning out, and before I knew it, I was in my room cutting myself. I cut deeper than I should have, and I had to go to the ER and get stitches. Now I feel like a jerk for taking a big step backwards after having not cut for 3 months. Okay. And if this is a story you get in therapy, initially as a therapist, you might feel like this is pretty complete and you might just start working from there. But as you'll see as we go through it, there's really more to it. And getting the extra details can be very useful. All right. So here we go. So we're going to start with the vulnerability factors. So we're going to look at maybe the night before and recently, looking at the context. And yes, I know each picture is not the same woman. I'm looking at Google Images, it's impossible to get the same person for everything. So yeah, I do get that. Anyway, so it's December and the holiday season's in full swing. They keep showing happy couples and families and commercials and shows on TV, and I've been feeling lonely and left out. So that's the context, right? So now we're in the holiday season. You're bombarded by all this stuff on TV, and it's bringing up different kinds of feelings, maybe about your expectations for the holidays and how things should be or how you wish you were right now. All right. And then the next part, none of my friends were around last night. So we're going specifically the night before. So I stayed home by myself, eating junk food while watching TV. I got a stomach ache and didn't get a good night's sleep. So you can see there's a variety of vulnerability factors here. One is just the overall holiday season. 2 is being single. when maybe you don't want to be single. 3 is being alone, eating junk food, so you're not eating in a healthy way, and especially late at night. Also, now you're getting a stomach ache, which is putting you at a vulnerability, because when you have a stomach ache, you're not feeling at your best, and you're not feeling that strong. You're feeling maybe more vulnerable, worse. Okay. And because of that, not sleeping well. And so when you're tired, you're also definitely more vulnerable to stress. Okay. So all these things were kind of accumulating the night before, going into the day of the self-injury. Okay. And the urge, by the way, at this point was maybe like 0 to 1. So, a little stressed, but not like actively thinking about cutting. Okay. So the next morning, so the day of the event. So as we often do, scrolling through social media, right? Might be a daily event, but now we're doing scrolling through social media in the context of this vulnerability. So the vulnerability continues. So I woke up feeling tired from the night before and still had a bit of a stomach ache. It was Saturday morning and I was home alone, so still alone. I don't work on Saturdays and was facing an empty day with no real plans. So maybe understimulation, alone, boredom, that can make you more vulnerable for sure. So what was the emotion? So the person identified loneliness as the key emotion there. The event, I was scrolling through social media and saw some pictures of couples and families and kids with Santa. Oh, so now I'm looking at all these happy people, and here I am by myself. So the thought was they all look like they're having a much better holiday season than I am. So just like it often does, social media could prompt these unhelpful comparisons. All right, so my ex's profile. So now the urge went from 1 to 3. So I started to think while I'm scrolling through social media, I wonder what my ex is up to. So then I took the action of looking up his social media profile. And then I saw a picture of him with his arms around another girl. They were smiling and looked like they were happy and into each other. Oh, all right. So now my urge is escalating because that's really upsetting. All right, so urge is now 3 to 4. I'm feeling miserable. So I'm thinking, how could he do that? How could he find someone else so soon? Did I not mean anything to him? So emotions, hurt, angry, sad, lonely. Thoughts, I knew he didn't love me. I'm probably not that lovable. Nobody wants to be with me. No wonder I haven't found anyone else since we broke up. Okay, so the thoughts are even getting more intense here. It's getting more hard on herself, and she's feeling worse and worse. And so the emotions now are shame and misery. So she's feeling like I'm alone because there's something wrong with me. I'm not even lovable. Like what, like it's really getting more intense here. So then she makes a half-hearted coping attempt. So she did try. She coped by listening to music. And a lot of people like to cope by listening to music. So that's a reasonable thing to do. So she did it by putting on a random channel on Pandora. So she felt, well, I initially felt somewhat distracted and less absorbed in my thoughts. So it started out pretty good. So the urge went down from 3 to 2. But then a song came on that reminded me of the breakup with my ex-boyfriend. Boom, urge back to 3. Okay, so now the urge is creeping back up again. So she's back into the negative spiral of thinking and feeling. So thought, it's not fair that he gets to move on with his life and be happy while I'm still here feeling lonely and miserable. So emotions are anger, misery, jealousy, body sensations. Now she's noticing even it's physical. Maybe it was physical before, but now it's really coming into her awareness. So she's feeling the high physical arousal, hyperarousal, heart racing, shakiness, flush, tense, agitated. So all that sympathetic nervous system stuff is happening. And then she's thinking, I can't stand it anymore. I hate myself. I hate my life. I wish I could disappear. So the thoughts continue to escalate. Now the urge is a 5. So it's really intense. So then she's on the brink. She's getting dangerously close to cutting. She goes into her room where she keeps a hidden stash of razor blades in her dresser drawer. And she has a thought. Now she's thinking like, as if she's talking to her ex, like, F you, look what you're doing to me. You'll be sorry. So there's some anger there toward her ex. Like, how could you do this to me? And now I'm going to get back at you. I'm going to show you how much you hurt me. So urge is 5. So then with the urge being 5, she goes ahead and cuts her arms with a razor blade, kind of zoned out, maybe watching the bleeding or, kind of sopping it up and just in that kind of that just slightly associated zone of just me and my, target behavior, and everything else is disappearing. So immediately after, short-term consequences, she feels some level of relief, and maybe her emotions and body feels calmer. It's true that endorphins are released when you cut yourself. So yes, that is often the case. Her thoughts were quieting down. And so a good question to ask, as suggested by the famous therapist, Janina Fisher, is how long did the relief last? So looking back, how long did you actually feel better? And sometimes people are surprised by, excuse me, how long it actually lasts. So sometimes it's a lot less than you think. Like maybe in your mind looking back, it was worth it and the relief was there for a while. But if you really think about it, maybe it wasn't that long at all. And it kind of could decrease over time, sort of like if you're getting high, like the initial high might be the greatest high. And then after that, you're just chasing that initial high and it's not as great as it used to be. And sometimes not even that special at all. Same kind of thing with self-injury. So here she's saying, well, the relief lasted actually about 15 minutes. So what happens? So the reality creeps back in. And now the urge is low, because she just cut so that it's lower. So the thought is, with her mind starting to get clearer again, seeing the whole picture, I cut too deep. I need to get it looked at and stitched up. Thought, I'm such an idiot. I had 3 months of no cutting and now I blew it. And so the emotions are creeping back in again. It's not just common relief. She's feeling some anxiety, some regret, some anger at herself. So then she has to go to the emergency room and she had to wait a while, and then she was getting stitches. And she's thinking, I could tell the staff are giving me dirty looks. I know they're judging me. And there could be a lot of reality to that. I mean, that really does happen. So emotions, shame, embarrassment, anger at them and myself. So all this is adding stress onto the original situation. So originally, she just had the thing about being alone at the holidays, but now she has to deal with, the fact that she cut herself, the fact that people are giving her dirty looks, that she has to take the trip to the emergency room. So it's compounding the original problem. And that's part of the negative consequence. So even more consequences and future vulnerability. So even beyond that day, now, here I am, I'm stuck with more cuts and stitches and eventually scars. And I'm going to have to make sure I'm wearing long sleeves to covering them up, which may not be too bad if you're, up north in Christmas time, but, other times of the year, it's not as convenient and easy to do that. And I have to deal with the reaction of my parents and my therapist, or who knows who else in your life. And emotions could be, now I'm also feeling about what I did, shame, guilt, sadness, disappointment in myself. So again, it's not just about now I'm alone for the holidays. It's about what I did to myself and feeling all the badness about that. Okay, so that undercurrent of emotions and thoughts about what I just did could be setting me up as a vulnerability for a possible future incident. And that could be problematic too. All right, so let's say we completed that behavior chain. So I completed it with myself, or I'm a therapist, I complete it with my client. So right away or later at some point, it's important to go back to those different points of the chain and identify what could I have done differently at those different junctures. And perhaps, if you want to stop the video and go back, you could identify some yourself before I share some of the things I thought of and see what you come up with. And the ones I'm going to share are just some ideas. It's not like a perfect answer. And there's probably a whole variety of other things you could try, but I'm just giving a few examples. Okay. So we're going to go back and, kind of show what this could look like. All right. So she's back. All right. The vulnerability of the night before and recently, it's the holiday season. She's watching stuff on TV and, she's overeating and all that stuff. So one thing you could do, if TV is triggering, especially if you're seeing all the holiday happiness on TV, maybe watch less TV or select your shows more carefully. Maybe just watch non-holiday shows and watch them on Netflix. So there's no commercials, or you're just very carefully selecting what it is so that something just doesn't come on randomly and trigger you. And if something does get triggering, it just happens to come on, you could always make sure you're changing the channel, which takes some willingness. You have to be willing to change the channel. Another thing is the please skill from DBT, which has to do with taking care of physical illness, balancing eating, avoiding mood-altering drugs, balancing sleep and exercising. That's what the PLEASE stands for. So maybe she could use PLEASE by going back to eating fruit or something healthier at night or lighter at night. So this way it could help her get a good night's sleep and balance her sleep. Okay, so then, the next day she's scrolling through social media and, thinking all the social comparisons, people having a better time than me. So one thing you could do is spend less time on social media, kind of discipline yourself to do that. Put the phone down a little bit more. And if you are on social media, try to catch yourself doing those social comparisons and maybe challenge those comparisons. But maybe just spending less time on social media, especially this time of the year or in this vulnerable state, would be a good idea. Okay, and then the part where she gets up to the ex's profile. So one thing is like, well, why did you choose to look up your ex's profile? And obviously it's probably some curiosity. You want to get some control over the situation, or, maybe if I did discover he was single, it'd make me feel better. So looking into that, exploring that might be useful. But in general, maybe you have to do some opposite to emotion action for love and discipline yourself to not look up that person. Maybe block his profile or delete it, or delete his number, or tell your friends not to tell you stuff about him if they still have some connections. Because once it's going to be hard to control how you feel once you find out about what's actually going on. So try to examine what that's all about and maybe take some opposite to emotion action to not go with it and look them up. Okay, so that's an important step here. So then, she saw the ex's profile, she's spinning out, she's getting miserable about it, and that's not fair and everything else. So instead of blaming herself and getting all hung up about everything, she could try some self-validation, kind of showing herself some understanding about, yeah, this makes sense. Of course, I'm upset about that. Yeah, it's hard being single around the holidays. So instead of beating herself up, give herself some self-validation, self-compassion, radical acceptance. I might have to radically accept that I'm going to be single for a while. It's hard to meet people, and I don't want to jump into a negative relationship. I want to make sure it's a good choice. So maybe I have to just radically accept that that's where I'm at and choose to construct my holiday season based on where I'm at right now and not where I wish I was. If it's hard to get out of your head, it's good to call a friend if you can. And she said she was alone, the friends weren't around, but maybe there was somebody that could talk on the phone. So maybe that could be a possibility, or someone she could text with that would make her feel better. But to reach out and get out of your head is important. Another thing she could try to do if she's able to focus is to check the facts, which is also a DBT skill under emotion regulation. So she can remind herself, there are still people that care about me. I'm not completely unlovable. There are people in my life, and really kind of bring to mind those relationships and make those more vivid in your mind, or maybe reach out to some of those people to remind you that maybe you're not as alone as you think. You feel alone because you don't have that romantic relationship, but you're not necessarily a terrible person that's unworthy of love. And, remind yourself perhaps that maybe there were a variety of reasons why we broke up, and it wasn't just because I'm an unlovable person. Maybe, I'm not perfect, but maybe there's other things I got to remember. Yeah, like he had an affair with somebody, or he had his own issues, or a part of me wanted to leave him too. Maybe there's other things to remember that's going to balance your view of the situation. And having a conversation with somebody might help remind you of these things too, if you can't get to it yourself. Okay, so then the half-hearted coping attempt of listening to the music. So listening to music can be a helpful coping skill, but if you're worried about possibly being triggered by what comes on the, Pandora, or the radio, or Spotify, or whatever, maybe make a playlist for yourself in advance that has some songs that would be helpful at a time when you're going through something. That would be good songs for you, that would be positive songs, or songs that would be, make you feel better and not make you feel worse. So instead of just leaving it to chance, plan ahead, cope ahead for that. But again, if something does come on that you find triggering, maybe just get yourself to change the station, be willing to change the station instead of just letting it play through and, wallow more in your misery. All right. So then, after that, she's spiraling and, it's not fair. And, how come he's moving on and I'm not moving on? And she's feeling more physiologically tense and agitated. So here it's getting a little more extreme. Also important to remember, don't compare your insides to someone else's outside. So part of why she's upset is because she's imagining that her ex-boyfriend is having this great life while she's having this terrible life. But just because he looked great in a picture, it doesn't mean necessarily that he's having a great time. It might be just a snapshot, but it may not tell the whole story. So I think we have to be careful about, this comparing how I'm feeling to how someone's looking. It's an important, reminder to ourselves that comes from 12-step programs. So the tip skill at this juncture could be really helpful because you're physiologically aroused and agitated. So the tip skill can help bring down that arousal to help you get back into a window of tolerance. So using ice, especially putting ice in your face, creates a dive response, which decreases your arousal. Exercising, which is also part of tip. Using the breath of fire, which is a Kundalini yoga technique, could be really good. So it's kind of like a rapid breath where you're kind of pumping your stomach in and out. Like, I don't know if you could hear that, but if you do that for a few minutes, it really could shift the way you're feeling. And they often recommend it as something to do when you're experiencing a strong urge. So you could definitely Google that or look it up on YouTube. Breath of fire. So that's a good one. You could take a shower, go outside and get some fresh air, just change the scenery, get out of the house and get out of your head. So there's a variety of things you could do. And there's probably many more that I'm not listing here, but I'm running out of space. Okay. All right. So next, so on the brink, getting dangerously close. So now she's in her room. She's looking through her drawer with the razors. So even at this juncture, it's still not too late to stop. If you catch yourself, I would just say, all right, get out of your room, go to a different location, get out of the house, take a walk, do something. Just get away from the thing that's, the sharp that, could be the most dangerous instrument you got. Also, in advance, you should be asking yourself, well, why did I keep those razors? What was that all about? Is it reflecting some mixed feelings I'm having about giving up the behavior? And exploring that a little bit more could be important. What is it that I'm afraid to completely give up, that I had this on the side? But if you're willing, I would say just get rid of the razors. Not that you couldn't find something else if you were really desperate, but if that was your main instrument, let's say, it's important not to have those in the house because your behavior might be tied into those specific tools, and getting rid of the tools could be helpful. All right. But still, you'd still have to work on the overall coping in general, but I would still try to get rid of the razors. All right. So next, all right, so the target behavior happened. Then immediately after, feeling some relief. But reminding yourself that the relief only lasts a short time and it may not have been worth it. Maybe I could still work on other ways to feel better, and this wasn't the best solution. And then, because afterwards the reality creeps back in and, feeling worse again. So again, to use some things like self-forgiveness and self-compassion, self-validation, and encouraging self-talk, taking some breaths. So instead of continuing to beat yourself up, which is going to make you feel even worse, radically accept, like, listen, I did this. I'm not proud of myself. I feel like I screwed up. I get it. But, I have to forgive myself for not being perfect, for making a mistake. That recovery is up and down, that sometimes relapse is part of recovery. Yeah, I did do it, but maybe I have to use this as an opportunity to learn. Meanwhile, let me just do what I need to do and heal this up and learn from it. Okay, so try to understand yourself, use a behavior change to learn about it, and try to avoid beating yourself up if you can. Because sometimes we beat ourselves up because we feel like that'll keep us in line in the future. That'll keep me from doing it again because I'll talk myself out of it. I'll say, stop it, and I'll stop it. But in essence, though, it kind of increases our vulnerability because it makes us feel more shameful. And then the shame could trigger us again in the future. All right. So again, try to learn from the experience. All right. So it happened. I accept that it happened. I'm just going to try to learn from it now. And I could still make the choice to go back to recovery. I don't have to throw it all away and just go back to my old habits. I could develop a cope ahead plan for the next time after understanding all the steps in this chain. I could work on my relationship and self-esteem issues, which kind of came to the surface here. It maybe brought it closer to my attention, closer to the forefront. So it provides an opportunity for me to work on those in general so that those don't make me as vulnerable in the future. All right. And again, be mindful of beating myself up and try to make those shifts to be kinder and more understanding toward myself instead. Okay. So now that you're finished, all right. So you have this all written down on paper. And the good thing is you could keep it, you could refer to it in the future. You could, if you have a few behavior change, you could compare them with each other and identify some patterns and maybe come up with overall themes that you need to work on or overall skills you want to practice. So all those things could be helpful in your recovery. All right, so I hope that was helpful for you guys. I know it was a little long, but I really want to give you that really clear picture of how to do this so that you feel empowered to try it yourself. All right, so have a good day, you guys, and I will see you again soon. All right, take care.